Welcome to Bible Talk Insight. Today we're diving deep into a really core concept for understanding biblical prophecy.
That's right. We're looking at the throne of God.
Exactly. And it's more than just, a fancy chair.
Oh, absolutely. It's foundational. It tells us so much about God's nature, his relationship with us, both in heaven and, interestingly, how that's represented here on earth.
Okay, so let's start there. God's throne. What's the first thing the Bible tells us about this? Where does this idea even begin?
Right at the start. Genesis 1.1.
Yeah.
God as creator.
Okay.
Like that very first act, creating everything, it inherently establishes his authority, his right to rule. It's sort of the baseline truth.
So creator equals authority. Got it. Now, is this throne something that, appears with creation?
No, actually. And this is fascinating. The idea of God's throne in heaven seemed to predate creation itself.
Really?
Yeah, Jeremiah 17.12 talks about God's glorious throne being established from the beginning.
From the beginning. Wow. So before the universe as we know it.
Exactly. It suggests his authority, his sovereignty existed before anything was formed.
Okay, and what's the significance of that? Why does that pre-existence matter?
Well, it gives us a much bigger backdrop for understanding things like the problem of evil. The rebellion of Lucifer. The traditional understanding is that it happened in that heavenly setting around the throne.
So the conflict isn't just an earthly thing, it's cosmic, rooted right there.
Precisely. It's about God's ultimate authority from the very start.
That adds quite a layer. So when we do get glimpses of this heavenly throne room, what does it look like? Isaiah 6 is often mentioned, right?
Oh, definitely. Isaiah 6 is powerful. He sees the Lord on a throne, and it's described as high and lifted up.
High and lifted up.
And he's surrounded by these beings, seraphim, and they're just constantly worshiping, crying out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts."
That repetition, holy, 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 it's intense.
It really emphasizes God's absolute otherness, his purity, his sacredness. It's a level beyond our comprehension.
And the throne itself, what does that symbolize?
It's the ultimate symbol of his kingship, his royalty, his total control over everything.
Okay.
And recognizing that, well, it calls for our trust, doesn't it? And our obedience.
Right. It's about rightful rule, not just raw power. Does the throne have other functions besides just symbolizing authority?
Yes, definitely. It's also the place of judgment.
Judgment.
Psalm 122 talks about thrones set for judgment. So God evaluates everything. But here's the amazing thing. He's also the source of salvation.
How so?
Think about the book of Judges. God raises up deliverers, saviors, right from his sovereign position. So justice and mercy, judgment and salvation, they both flow from his throne, from his authority.
That's quite the paradox. The judge is also the rescuer.
Exactly.
Now, the Bible consistently places this throne in heaven. What does that location tell us about God?
It highlights his transcendence. He's separate from, distinct from, infinitely beyond his creation.
Okay.
Ecclesiastes puts it simply, God is in heaven and you upon earth.
Right.
It points to how vast the difference is. Job, they stress this too. His ways, his thoughts, they're just not our ways. He's incomprehensible in his fullness.
That's a humbling thought. And the descriptions we get of the throne area, they really emphasize that majesty, don't they?
They really do. Ezekiel's vision.
Oh.
It's wild, a kind of supernatural chariot throne with cherubim.
Yeah.
Daniel sees a throne of actual flames, and Revelation talks about an emerald rainbow around it, a sea of glass like crystal.
Wow, just these incredible, almost overwhelming images.
They're meant to evoke awe, reverence, humility.
Which makes Isaiah's reaction totally understandable.
Absolutely. When he sees all this, he cries out, "Woe is me, for I am undone."
Because the contrast is just so stark.
Exactly. Human imperfection face to face with absolute divine holiness. What else could you say?
But then, right after that moment of feeling undone, something amazing happens.
Yes. Grace steps in. One of the seraphim takes a live coal from the altar.
On the altar.
And touches Isaiah's lips. It's a symbol of forgiveness, of cleansing from sin, purification.
So it's like acknowledging the unworthiness allows for the cleansing.
Precisely. And that cleansing is what prepares him for service. It makes it possible for him to respond when God asks, "Whom shall I send?"
And he says,
"Here I am, send me."
What a powerful sequence. Encounter, conviction, cleansing, commission.
It's a pattern, really.
Okay, so that's the heavenly throne. But you mentioned it's also represented on earth. How does that work?
Right. God's presence and authority aren't just up there. They're also shown mirrored, you could say, down here. The Garden of Eden is probably the first key example.
Eden? How is Eden like a throne room?
Well, think about what happens after Adam and Eve are expelled. God places cherubim to guard the way back in, right? At the east of the garden.
Yes, with a flaming sword.
Okay, now the Hebrew word used there for God placing or dwelling the cherubim is shekan.
Shekan, okay.
That word is directly related to the word for tabernacle, mishkan, the place where God's presence would later dwell among the Israelites.
Whoa, wait. So the language itself connects the guarding cherubim in Eden to God's dwelling place, the tabernacle.
It strongly suggests that. It's like God tabernacled the cherubim there, a marker of his presence, even in judgment.
That's incredible. I never caught that linguistic link before. What else connects Eden to the throne idea?
Well, you mentioned the flaming sword, divine power, and judgment. Then there are the rivers flowing out of Eden.
Right, 4 rivers.
Compare that to Revelation 22, where the river of the water of life flows from the throne of God and the Lamb.
Ah, another parallel. Water source.
Exactly. And precious stones. Genesis mentions gold and onyx and bdellium and land associated with Eden. Ezekiel's throne description and Revelation's New Jerusalem are also full of precious stones.
So multiple elements. Cherubim, flowing water, precious materials, the sense of divine presence. It paints Eden as a kind of earthly prototype of the heavenly dwelling.
A microcosm, yeah. A tangible link.
Okay. And then later, we get another really strong earthly representation, don't we? The Ark of the Covenant.
Absolutely central. The Ark is explicitly called God's footstool in places like 1 Chronicles 28.
His fifth stool. So not the throne itself, but directly connected to it, like where his feet would rest, extending his presence.
Exactly. And what's on top of the Ark?
The cherubim, facing each other over the mercy seat.
Right. Another direct visual link to the heavenly throne room imagery.
And the Ark was where God's presence was focused, where judgment and atonement happened.
Precisely. It functioned as the earthly focal point of God's rule and presence, just like the heavenly throne. Psalms, Lamentations, they all reinforce this idea of it being his footstool.
So Eden, then the Ark. Tangible ways God represented his heavenly authority here. Now let's talk symbolism a bit more. The way the Israelites camped around the tabernacle, that wasn't random, was it?
Not at all. It's highly significant. Numbers chapter 2 lays it out. You have the tabernacle at the very center.
Okay.
And the tribes are arranged around it. But there are 4 lead tribes, one on each side. Judah on the east, Reuben south, Ephraim west, and Dan north.
Right. And there's a tradition, isn't there, about their standards, their banners?
Yes, a strong ancient tradition, noted by scholars like Keel and Delitzsch. It connects the symbols on the standards of these 4 lead tribes to the 4 faces of the living creatures, the cherubim, that Ezekiel saw by God's throne.
Wait, the same faces?
The very same. The tradition links Judah with the lion, Reuben with the man, Ephraim with the ox, and Dan with the eagle.
Lion, man, ox, eagle. Those are the faces from Ezekiel's vision and John's vision in Revelation, too.
Exactly.
So the actual layout of the camp on earth was designed to mirror the configuration around God's throne in heaven.
That's the strong implication.
Okay.
It suggests God was intentionally organizing his people on earth to reflect the heavenly reality, connecting them directly to his presence and rule.
Wow, that's profound. It connects the earthly community right into the cosmic picture.
And think about this. That pattern doesn't just disappear. The New Jerusalem in Revelation.
Yeah.
It had 12 gates, 3 on each of its 4 sides, named for the tribes of Israel. That 4-sided, ordered structure reflecting God's presence continues right into the eternal state.
So this careful arrangement in the wilderness camp, in the visions, in the eternal city, what's the big takeaway? What is God showing us?
It really underscores his intention, his desire to draw humanity close to himself, to bring us near his throne, into his presence.
Not just be ruled from afar, but to be brought near.
Exactly. Revelation says in the New Jerusalem there's no temple building because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple, ultimate nearness.
Okay. So faced with this incredible reality, God's holiness, his authority, but also his desire to draw us near and cleanse us, what's our response meant to be?
Well, I think Isaiah sets a pattern again, doesn't he?
Here I am, send me.
Right. A willingness, an availability that comes from experiencing that grace and cleansing. We're called to a similar posture.
Like John the Baptist, Jesus called him a burning and shining lamp.
Yeah, he knew his role, pointing people to Jesus, preparing the way. He fulfilled his send me mission.
So for us today, that means sharing what we know, sharing our own experience of God.
I think so. It doesn't mean you have to be some great theologian or have all the answers.
Right.
It's about sharing what you do know about Jesus, about the grace you've experienced. It's the natural next step after encountering God's holiness and his mercy.
And doing that, sharing our faith, it actually helps us grow, doesn't it? Keeps the focus outward.
It really does. It takes the focus off just our own internal struggles and connects us to God's larger work in the world. It helps keep that connection to the throne, to his purposes alive in us.
So as we kind of wrap up this dive into God's throne, what are the key things you hope listeners really take away?
I think first, just grasp the sheer majesty of it all. God's transcendence, his holiness, his authority seated in heaven. But don't stop there.
Okay.
Also see how he deliberately chose to represent that presence and authority right here on earth in places like Eden and through the ark. He wants connection.
And that amazing symbolism of the four faces, lion, man, ox, eagle, connecting the heavenly court to the earthly camp, even to God's own multifaceted nature. Maybe it's such a rich image.
It truly is. It weaves through Scripture. And maybe the most personal takeaway is that call to respond. Responding to God's grace, his holiness, his call with a willing heart, like Isaiah.
Here I am, send me.
Yeah. So maybe the question for you listening right now is, what personal here I am, send me moment might God be inviting you into today? As you think about his throne, his love, his desire to draw you close and send you out.
That's a powerful thought to end on, something for all of us to consider.